Your best hire isn't working anymore. They used to be this amazing person when you first hired them a couple months ago, but something's changed. And I can tell you, after having worked with a lot of founders through this exact same situation, this problem is never about that new hire. And honestly, I think it starts long before you actually post that job description. Now, unfortunately, most of you can't see that part clearly. So you're gonna go through this exact same situation with the next person you hire and the one after that. When a new hire isn't working, I find that most founders just say, oh, it's the wrong person. They think to themselves, it was a bad fit, and come up with all these wonderful rationalizations about it. Of course, most founders are smart. So they go back to hiring, they run the exact same process with the same broken interviews, and then wonder 6 months later why it's happening again. What I wanna show you today in this video is that part of that problem is something that almost nobody ever talks about. And that part happens long before you go to hire someone new. I'm gonna break it down into two specific things that are going wrong that I often see. And by the end of this video, I'm gonna show you how to fix what most founders don't even consider. And no, I don't think it's about the people you hire. These two solutions are about how you do things. Okay, so here's the first myth that I see. You're hiring the wrong way. The way most founders hire is fundamentally broken. They put a ton of time and energy into it, and they still end up getting terrible results. And that's because they're using the wrong filters. So the generic filter everyone uses is just looking at the past experience and past behavior of that employee. So what they end up doing is they look at where someone's worked, what they built, how they performed. It feels rigorous, like what everyone else is doing, and it feels like evidence. It's what you've always done. After all, isn't that the best predictor of future performance? It's past performance. Sure, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. Because the nuance is that past experience and past behavior is contextual, right? Someone's behavior happened under a specific leader at a specific company, selling specific products to a specific market in a specific period in their life and in the workplace, under specific guardrails with a specific manager and a specific team. In fact, even their state of mind could have been different at that time, and their beliefs could have been different. So instead of hiring the person as they are now to fulfill your specific needs, you end up hiring who they were under those conditions at their previous roles that are probably not going to exist at your company. And that person that they were at their previous roles probably won't exist at your company either. It's a whole different environment. There's actually a term for what happens next when you do this, and it's called cognitive entrenchment. When someone builds deep expertise in one environment, that expertise often doesn't transfer, it calcifies, it entrenches. They stop adapting and they start reapplying. So the playbook that made them successful in their last role becomes exactly what they're going to do at your company. So the funny part about all of this is that there's literally 100 years of data showing this. And the research keeps saying that same thing, that past experience is not a good predictor of future performance. And it's only predictive when the environments are close enough, right? And the work that you're doing is almost the same. But the thing is, environments change. And the predictive value of that past experience just isn't there when compared to other things. Your company is going to be a different environment than that employee experienced in the past, almost every single time. And what makes all this worse is what Daniel Kahneman, the famous behavior economist, calls the illusion of validity. So the more hiring you've done, the more certain your instincts feel. But that certainty isn't accuracy. It's just familiarity. And when the pattern looks real, you think it is real, but the reality is that it's not. Let's get into what this actually looks like in practice, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. What ends up happening for most people is you bring someone with a strong track record, and a few months in, they're trying to implement all the things that have worked in their last company. What they end up doing is they are applying those learned patterns and behaviors to a new environment where they might not fit and often don't. So you end up sitting there wondering what went wrong. I'll give you an example. One of my clients, let's call him Tim, he hired a VP of sales from a well-known tech company. And on paper, this guy was exactly what Tim needed. He led a team of 50, scaled revenue into tens of millions. He had the frameworks, he had the language, he had the confidence. He was so good during the interviews. And then 6 months later, morale had dropped and the pipeline really did suck. And when I sat down with Tim and asked what happened, he said what every founder always tells me. He's like, oh, he just didn't get it. I don't think he was a good fit. But honestly, that's all BS. So let me translate what Tim was really trying to say. What he was trying to say is that this new employee did things his way instead of what Tim wanted and what Tim had seen in the past or heard in the past. And that's the thing about experience, right? It's going to tell you where someone's been or what they've done and achieved. But what you actually need is to know what a candidate is able to do and whether or not they have the mental horsepower and the right personality for your specific role. In science, what the research tells us, they call that general mental ability and personality, specifically tested through psychometrics. Basically, you're trying to see how someone thinks at their core. And the reality is that smart people with the right values, the right personality, the right general mental ability almost always outperform the right people with the right experience. I mean, there is a caveat, right? You have to know enough about a field to be able to jumpstart running. But once you do, then experience becomes almost useless as a predictor compared to those other things. And honestly, that's where experience really matters. It's not the way most founders assume. It really is just like, do you have a baseline foundation, right? And once that foundation's there, other things become a lot more important. And even when founders get the hire right, there's this second thing that ends up happening that undoes all that hard work you did during your hiring process. I think this one is harder to see because it starts the day that employee walks in. So let's get into myth 2. You think the job ends at the hire. Here's the second thing. This one is a lot harder to hear. Too many founders treat hiring like it's a finish line. They pour enormous energy into finding the right person, interviewing, evaluating, negotiating, onboarding. And then the moment that person walks through the door, the attention shifts. The energy goes somewhere else, and that hire is left to figure things out. This is what I call the employee lifecycle problem. And it's the same pattern I see with customers, by the way. Founders overinvest in the acquisition and way underinvest in everything that comes after. I mean, just think about it. You put weeks into finding the right person. You put so many hours into interviews across multiple people on your team. And then if the employee is lucky, you might give them a week, maybe 2 weeks of onboarding. Most of the founders I work with don't. And the onboarding is often half-assed anyway, where you just give them a bunch of boring stuff to read and maybe like an hour of your day and you call it there. After that, this person ends up on their own and there's really no clear deliverable, no definition of what success looks like at 30, 60, 90 days, just expectation that they'll figure it out. They're the expert. They have all the experience. They know what to do. And when they don't, when the output isn't what you expected, when there's friction in the relationship, the first place your mind goes is, maybe it's them. You'll just be like, they just had the wrong attitude. Or you'll say, they just don't have initiative and they needed too much hand-holding. Or some crap like, they were just a bad fit. But here's what I really want you to sit with. Did you even have clarity on the specific enumerated goals that you want from this person? And I'm not talking about crap like, I want them to figure out sales or I want them to figure out growth, but something specific, something like I want them to find repeatable ways of getting at least 5 leads a week starting on week 2. And in order to do that, I need them to prepare a document on who they're targeting, how, when, why, and what tools we're going to use. And guess what? We're going to go over that by the end of the week. Did you give them that kind of clarity? But the thing is, if you're not doing that, I need you to be comfortable to watch them do things in a way that you don't agree with, in a way that don't match the patterns you've seen in the past. And not only to be comfortable, but for you to wait and judge them based on the results. Can you do that? On top of that, did you actually create an environment where they have the power and psychological safety to question you and the team and to get help when they need it? Or did you say vague things that I always hear like, you just bother me whenever? What did you actually manage after the hire? What did you tell them? The answer for most founders is not much. And that's the structural gap. It's not a character flaw with the hire that you made. The back half of the process was just never built. So let me show you what building it actually looks like when you do things the right way. Because the fix here is a lot simpler than most founders expect, and it starts before you even write a job description. So here's the fix. You need to start with an onboarding doc. So here's the shift I walk most founders through. And it sounds simple, but most people are doing this completely backwards. Before you write the job description, write the onboarding doc. Define the deliverables. What does this person actually produce? What does success look like at day 30? What about day 60? What about day 90? How do you know they're doing the right things? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you experiencing? How will you measure whether they're doing what you hired them to do? Then work backwards from that to the job description. What happens, I find, when founders do this is something very interesting. You start to realize whether your need is real and specific, or whether it's just anxiety about this gap or about this problem that you have as a founder. A lot of founders, when they sit down to write this onboarding doc, they discover they can't actually define what this person is supposed to deliver and through what mechanisms. They have this feeling that they need something because they feel pain, but there's no clear output that they can enumerate. And that's where hires fail. And here's how I have founders think through that. 3 questions. There's 3 questions that I want you to ask yourself in order. First, what is the specific measurable goal this person achieves at each of those milestones? And let me give you a concrete example of what I often see from founders. Like, let's say you're hiring a customer success person, and you might give a day 90 goal, something like, I feel like they're genuinely taking care of customers. That's a fine starting point, but it's a feeling, and feelings aren't enough. So what I do is I move founders to the second question. What are you actually observing that tells you the goal is being met? How do you know they're taking care of customers? Is it their CRM notes? Is there something in the notes that they're putting there? Is it that the team is saying something about how they're handling tickets? Is it that you're auditing the calls and there's specific things you see? Is it specific questions they're asking? Or is it that they're not going on monologues or they're not talking 50% of the time? Make it something measurable. Now you can manage it. It's specific rather than just a gut feeling. And the third thing I want you to ask yourself is, what deliverables do you need in your hand to make that assessment? Maybe this person gets an NPS rating from 10 customers, and maybe they're getting anonymous surveys from 5 teammates. And if they all come back strong, then you say, great. Or are you pulling specific calls, tickets, notes, and you're auditing it yourself on a regular basis? I don't know. But what's important is that these deliverables have to be there to force an accountability loop that you can actually close. And that's why it's so important, because when you define the outputs clearly, the job description, the interview questions, the work samples, and everything else often write themselves. And more importantly, the person you hire knows exactly what they're walking into, what they're being measured on, and what doing the job well actually looks like. Sadly, most founders have never hired with that level of clarity, and then they sit there wondering why the person never delivers. So here's what I really want you to hear. And this is the part that most people just cannot stand believing. When a company cycles through multiple people for the same roles, the founders I work with almost always land on the same explanation. Wrong person, bad fit, they didn't get it. Rarely, almost never, do they stop and ask themselves, what is the variable that stays consistent across every failed hire? The process stayed the same, the environment stayed the same, the founder stayed the same. Often the founders will tell me, well, I asked different questions, or I looked for different kinds of candidates. But this is the classic fundamental attribution error in action. This is the tendency most of us have to underemphasize situational or systemic factors and overemphasize the personality-based explanations for someone's behavior. Right? The brain is looking for the single face to blame because that's a lot simpler than examining the system. So you end up blaming that employee that you fired, and you get that nice 6 weeks of relief, but then you start that cycle again with someone new. I've seen founders go through 3 hires for the same role in 18 months. Each time the story is slightly different, but the outcome remains the same. Because the thing they don't change was the thing that actually needed to change. So the question worth asking, the one that actually moves the needle, that is, did I set this person up to succeed? Most founders never ask themselves that question because that means examining the whole process, and that means examining themselves, which is tough. And the second question is honestly even harder. And it's also the only one that changes anything. The hiring problem most founders have comes down to 2 things: a process that was never designed to actually work, and a back half that no one actually managed. So what do you need to do? You need to fix that filter. Stop screening for what someone did before somewhere else, and you need to start screening for whether they can adapt and perform in your environment. That's unique, that's different, you have different needs. And then second, you need to fix the life cycle. Getting someone through the door is where the work begins, and most founders are treating it like the work is done. So if you recognize yourself in this video, don't just close the tab. The gap between seeing the patterns and changing it is exactly the kind of work that I do with founders. The link in the description is to my growth barrier assessment. It's going to show you exactly where your issues are showing up in your business. I ask that you start there, and if you want more of this, of course, please subscribe and like and comment on the video. See you next time.